Welcome to Reformed Thinking. So, let's talk about the Book of Psalms. How do you see it? Is it just kind of a random collection of 150 songs? Something you can just flip open to find a verse for any mood? I mean, yeah, it works that way, but that's missing a huge piece of the puzzle. What if I told you the Psalms aren't just a hymn book? What if the entire book was put together on purpose to tell one single massive story? A story about a king.
Yeah, and this quote here really gets to the heart of the problem they were facing. Israel was left without a king and with a wardrobe of royal robes in their hymnody. Think about that. Their king is gone, their nation's in shambles, but their songbook is packed with these amazing songs, all about a king, his coronation, his battles, his relationship with God. It's like having all the gear for a championship game, but your star player is gone. This was a huge crisis for them. And the Book of Psalms, the one in our Bibles today, is the incredible answer they came up with.
Okay, so to get how they solved this, we've got to rewind a bit. We need to go back to what these songs were for in the first place. The absolute key that unlocks the whole book is Israel's king. Specifically, the guy God called his anointed one.
And when we hear that word Messiah, we immediately think of Jesus, right? But we have to pump the brakes a little. The original Hebrew word Mashiach, it just means anointed one. In the Old Testament, this wasn't some future abstract title. It was a job description for real people, patriarchs, priests, and most of all, the kings, like David. They were all called God's anointed one. It just meant they were set apart for a specific task from God.
Right? This whole anointing thing wasn't just for show. It meant, first, that God himself had publicly picked you for the job. Second, it meant you were consecrated. You were now God's property, set apart for his purposes. And third, it meant God's Spirit was going to equip you to actually do the work. For the king, this was the whole deal.
And this whole concept of the king as God's anointed is built on one massive promise, the Davidic covenant. Look at the language here from 2 Samuel 7. God promises David an eternal house, an eternal kingdom, and an eternal throne. Not temporary, eternal. This promise was the rock on which Israel built all of its songs and all of its hopes for the future. But then, disaster strikes. This is the central conflict of Israel's entire story. The monarchy gets completely wiped out. Jerusalem is leveled, and the people are hauled off to Babylon. That promise of an eternal throne, it looked like it was completely broken.
So look at this timeline. David's kingdom gets going around 1000 BC. Then, bam, 586 BC, it all comes crashing down. For decades and decades, there's no king. The throne is empty. And it's right in this period, around 520 BC after they've returned, that Israel's scribes and leaders start working on their national songbook.
So this leads to the million-dollar question, right? What in the world do you do with a whole library of songs written for a king when you don't have a king anymore? Do you just toss them out? Do you put them in a museum as a sad relic of a better time that's gone for good? Well, no, they didn't do that. They did something way smarter. The leaders of Israel didn't get rid of these royal psalms. Instead, they took this collection of songs and very carefully edited and arranged them to speak right into their current crisis.
They re-signified them. I love that word. They gave them a new meaning, a new significance. They basically took those royal robes, all that kingly language and imagery, and they took them off the shoulders of the failed, sinful kings of the past, and they draped them onto the shoulders of a perfect king to come, the future Messiah.
And this was a full-on project. They had clear goals. They wanted to save these precious hymns, for sure, but they also had to deal with the fact that the covenant looked like it had failed. So their solution was to point all that hope toward a future Messiah. They did this by organizing the 150 Psalms into 5 books, essentially creating a new book of instruction, like a second Torah, for the people to read and meditate on.
That new 5-book structure wasn't just for neatness. No way. It was designed to tell a story. It was meant to guide the reader through the whole mess, from the crisis and the feeling of loss, all the way to a new and even bigger hope. It paints a portrait of the Messiah. And a huge part of this was a shift in how the Psalms were used. See, originally, these were songs for corporate worship. You'd sing them together in the temple liturgy. But with the temple gone, the editors reshaped the book so it could be used by individuals for personal, reflective meditation. It became a book you would study and pray and think through on your own.
So here's the story they built. Books 1 and 2 start us off with the ideal king, David, and all his prayers. Then you hit book 3. It's the dark book. It ends with Psalm 89, which is just this heart-wrenching cry that God's covenant has failed. It's the absolute bottom. But then Book 4 answers back. It says, okay, maybe we don't have an earthly king, but God is the eternal king. And that sets up Book 5, which looks forward with this renewed hope for a new, greater king from David's line who will get it right.
And by arranging the book this way, all these new ideas started to pop. The Psalms of Lament, which were originally David complaining about his own problems, were now seen as pointing to a Messiah who would have to suffer before he could win. The Psalms about God ruling the nations, well, that was going to happen through this Messiah. And you get Psalms like 110 that even suggest this coming king would be someone way bigger and greater than David ever was.
So all of this leads us right to the New Testament, because the apostles and guys like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they didn't have to invent some new way of reading the Psalms. They just read them the way they had been shaped to be read for hundreds of years, as a book about the Messiah.
What's this number? 116. That's how many times the New Testament directly quotes the book of Psalms. It is quoted more than any other book in the Old Testament, by a long shot. And that is not an accident. So you gotta understand, the New Testament writers weren't just flipping through the Psalms looking for random verses that kinda sounded like they fit Jesus. That's not what proof texting is about. They were reading the whole book, following the story that the editors had laid out, and they saw that the whole narrative was fulfilled in Jesus of Nazareth. They got the big picture. And here's how these saw it working. David, the actual king, was a type. He was a pattern, a foreshadow. He was called God's son because of the covenant promise, and he was a man who, like we see in Psalm 51, had to confess his own sin. But Jesus is the antitype. He is the real thing that the shadow was pointing to. He is the Son of God by his very nature. He is the king who is without sin. He fulfills those royal psalms in a way David or any other king never could. So the book of Psalms isn't just a grab bag of songs. It is a carefully put together story about a king. A story that starts with David, crashes into a crisis, and is then reshaped to point all our hope to a future Messiah. And that just leaves us with a question, doesn't it? If a book we thought we knew so well was put together like this, with this kind of intention, what other big stories might be waiting for us to find in the pages of the Old Testament?